We are sitting on a truly colossal environmental problem. I'm talking about global municipal solid waste.
Hmm.
Every single year, we generate billions of tons of this stuff. And here's the brutal reality. The vast majority of it, maybe 85%, often just sits there.
Yeah, and these huge passive dump sites and
It's
landfills.
just sitting there.
And it's such a tragedy of wasted energy because this waste, MSW, it has a heat content, a calorific value that's, comparable to peat. We're talking 4.8 to 7.0 megajoules per kilogram.
So we're literally throwing away fuel.
We are, but the real danger comes from what happens when this waste just rots, or worse, burns uncontrollably.
That is where the environmental stakes get, well, immediate and frankly terrifying.
Exactly. When you leave these waste sites uncontrolled, they basically act as massive bioreactors.
Yeah.
They produce landfill gas that's often 30 to 65% methane.
Which is a huge climate problem on its own.
A massive one. And when that methane concentration gets over, say, 45%, the whole site becomes dangerously flammable. And worse still, if people try to burn the waste to, reduce the volume, those uncontrolled fires create highly toxic polychlorinated hydrocarbons, dioxins.
It's the dioxins.
And they can be released at shocking concentrations. I mean, sometimes reaching 1,000 nanograms per cubic meter.
1,000. That number is just staggering. I mean, to put that in perspective for you, a modern controlled thermal plant has these incredibly strict limits, usually well below 1/10 of a nanogram.
It's a world of
It's
difference.
the difference between a clean energy source and an environmental disaster.
And that's why our mission has to be to reclaim the energy in that waste and do it cleanly. We need to move toward a truly circular economy.
So our deep dive today focuses on the technical solution here. We're moving from simple waste to energy, or WTE, via incineration, to a more sophisticated and more environmentally sound approach, waste to gas, WTG. But the major technical hurdle here isn't making the gas. It's efficiently burning the tricky low-quality gas that results. This stuff often has a low to medium heating value of just 4 to 10 megajoules per cubic meter.
It's very difficult stuff to handle.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core technical challenge is stability. When your fuel is this low grade, it just wants to flicker out.
Right.
And the secret weapon we are deep diving into today is mastering the physics of motion. Vortex technologies.
That's the key. Gasification, the WTG process, is where we take this waste, or more commonly a processed version called refuse-derived fuel, RDF,
Right.
and we convert it into a fuel gas. People call it syngas or producer gas. This all happens at very high temperatures, usually between 800 and 1200 degrees Celsius, using a carefully controlled amount of oxygen or steam.
And just as a process, gasification already has a huge environmental advantage over traditional mass incineration.
Yeah. A critical one. Gasification operates in what we call reducing conditions and at slightly lower temperatures than a mass burn. And that combination is highly effective at suppressing the formation of dioxins.
So you're just not making them in the first place.
You're not making them. I mean, studies have shown dioxin concentrations from air gasification measured at 0.0086 nanograms. It's tiny. It's less than 1/10 of the EU limit.
Wow.
Plus, those slightly lower temperatures help us suppress the formation of thermal nitrogen oxides and isox.
So we have a cleaner, safer front-end process. But here's the trade-off. We now have this gas, this syngas, but it's notorious for flameouts. Why is it so difficult to burn stably?
It really comes down to cost and dilution. The cheapest, most common gasifiers, they just use air as the oxidizer.
Good.
But air is 78% nitrogen, which is inert. So when you produce your fuel gas, it gets heavily diluted with all this inert nitrogen. And that dilution just drops the energy density drastically, often into that low 4 to 7 megajoule range.
So it's like trying to light a fire where every piece of kindling is surrounded by wet towels.
That's a great analogy.
There just isn't enough concentrated energy to sustain the burn.
Exactly. The low energy density means there isn't enough heat propagating quickly enough from the existing flame to ignite the next bit of fuel before it, blows away.
The flame just goes out.
The flame goes out. Now, we can avoid this. If you use pure oxygen or steam or a plasma gasifier, you get a much higher calorific gas, sometimes 10 to 40 mJ. But those methods are expensive. The challenge for commercial success lies in taking that abundant, tricky, low-calorific gas and burning it reliably.
And that takes us to the core breakthrough, realizing that we can use physics to overcome the chemistry. Why is organizing a chaotic, intense, swirling motion a vortex? the ultimate solution?
Because the problem is time. We need to accelerate the interaction between the fuel and the oxidizer.
Right.
By introducing a swirl, we are essentially harnessing powerful centrifugal forces. It's the same force that pins you to the wall of a carnival ride. This process effectively, well, it rams the fuel gas and the oxidizer air together.
So we are creating a high-pressure, intense, localized mixing zone.
Precisely. This high-intensity combustion regime ensures two things that low-calorific gas desperately needs: intense, rapid mixing and a prolonged residence time in the heat zone.
You're forcing it to stay and burn.
You're forcing it. It overcomes the poor energy density by making the combustion happen immediately and continuously.
That stability must have huge knock-on effects for efficiency and emissions.
It does. Not only does it increase the chamber's overall productivity, you can process more gas, but it also helps reduce harmful emissions like carbon monoxide.
Because it's burning more completely.
Much more completely. And it even helps with NOx, surprisingly, because the intense swirl creates a more uniform temperature field. It eliminates the sharp hot spots that drive NOx formation.
I'm just imagining trying to hold this fire together when the fuel quality is bouncing all over the place. Here's where it gets really interesting, because sometimes even this powerful vortex isn't enough. If the gas quality is really low, say below 5 megajoules, what do?
You need a thermal or a chemical cheat code.
A cheat code. I like it.
The first is energy input via preheating. You can recover heat from the combustion exhaust to heat up the incoming gas and air, and we're talking massive preheating.
I want.
Experiments have shown stable burning when the producer gas itself was heated to 800 degrees Celsius and the combustion air to 400 Celsius.
But wait, preheating to those temperatures sounds incredibly energy intensive itself.
Sure.
Are you just sacrificing overall efficiency to get stability?
That's a great question, and it's where the engineering optimization comes in. Yes, you spend energy to preheat, but you're using waste heat from the back end of the process.
So you're recycling it.
You're recycling energy that would otherwise just be lost. This significantly improves the overall thermal balance and dramatically lowers the needed fuel input compared to, say, trying to stabilize it with supplemental natural gas.
And the second cheat code is enrichment, if the gas is truly dreadful.
Yes. If the gas is ultra-low quality, you have to add something potent. I saw one study involving a biogas that was just 5.5 megajoules per cubic meter. It just wouldn't sustain a flame at all.
It wouldn't light.
Wouldn't light. To achieve stable combustion, they needed to add at least 20% by volume of a higher calorific gas, like pure syngas.
Hydrogen and CO.
Right. Just to bring the overall heating value up to about 7 megajoules. So it proves that the physics of the swirl, it needs an energetic partner when the fuel is that marginal.
So the vortex provides the perfect environment, and the preheating or enrichment makes sure there's enough initial energy to keep the reaction going.
That's it.
So let's look at the hardware. How do engineers actually build this swirl into the combustion chambers?
The designs are quite ingenious. You often see what's called a coaxial swirl burner, where the gas and air are injected with a combination of tangential, that's the swirling part, and axial flow.
Straight in.
Exactly. And this setup forces the creation of a central recirculation zone. It's a kind of solid body rotation that constantly pulls hot combustion products back to the inlet, stabilizing the incoming fresh gas.
Then you have the cyclone chambers.
Yeah.
That sounds much more like you're intentionally inviting a miniature controlled tornado inside the burner.
That is precisely the goal. These are typically cylindrical or conical chambers where both air and gas are injected tangentially. This creates a strong, sustained rotational vortex flow throughout the entire chamber.
And the big advantage there is.
The big advantage is that the vortex drastically increases the effective path length of the gases.
Which means?
It means the gas residence time, how long it stays in the hot zone, is significantly extended. And since the gas spends longer inside that hot environment, it ensures a much better burnout of any unoxidized stuff, making the exhaust cleaner.
I see.
Engineers are even integrating this concept into flameless combustors, which use that intense internal recirculation and preheated air to get high-efficiency burning while keeping the temperature relatively low, around 1030 Celsius on exit, which is key for minimizing NOx.
Now, for what I think is the real aha moment of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Integrating this vortex combustion with the Stirling engine. Why is the Stirling engine suddenly such a perfect partner for this dirty, low-grade gas?
The connection is brilliant. It just solves multiple problems at once. The key is that the Stirling engine is an external combustion engine.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Think of it this way. Instead of fuel burning inside the engine's pistons like in your car, the fuel burns in a separate external chamber. And that heat is then transferred via a heat exchanger to the working fluid inside the engine.
So it's like heating your house with a wood stove outside and then
Oh.
piping the clean, stable heat inside to power a machine. The dirtiness of the fuel never touches the sensitive internal mechanics.
That's the perfect analogy because the heat supply is external, the quality of the fuel matters so much less to the engine itself. We can eliminate the need for costly and complex gas cleaning procedures.
Right, because traditional engines and gas turbines, they demand you strip out contaminants like tars.
Those complex, sticky organic liquids, yes, and solid particulates, they have to go.
But with our stabilized Vortex chamber paired with the Stirling engine.
You can feed the raw gas directly in. The tars don't need to be cleaned out, they just become additional valuable fuel. Wow.
This radically simplifies the process, increases the overall system energy efficiency, and critically, it extends the durability of the engine. Corrosive compounds like hydrogen chloride never contact the sensitive engine components.
So we've solved the physics and the hardware problem of stabilizing the flow, but these are incredibly complex environments. You've got turbulent flows, intense heat transfer, chemical reactions, all happening at once. To optimize these things, you can't just rely on trial and error.
Oh, absolutely not. That's why computational fluid dynamics, CFD, is so essential. We can't physically measure the velocity, temperature, and concentration at every single point inside that rapidly spinning hot chamber.
You'd melt the probe.
You'd melt it instantly. So computer modeling lets us optimize their design before we ever weld the first piece of steel. We need reliable mathematical models to simulate the turbulence and the reaction rates.
When researchers model this, they face that classic trade-off.
Hmm.
Accuracy versus computational cost. What are the dominant modeling choices here? The fundamental trade-off is between models that give you an average snapshot of the chaos and models that try to simulate every chaotic detail.
Okay.
Reynolds Average Navier-Stokes, or RANS models, are the workhorse. They are computationally efficient, and they give you a pretty good averaged picture of the flow.
And the alternative?
Huh.
Super detailed one.
Large Eddy Simulation, or LES. Think of RANS as a satellite map showing the average street traffic, and LES as a video recording showing every single car, every change in speed.
I see.
LES is far more accurate in capturing the true turbulence, which is vital for these swirling flows, but it is massively expensive. It can be 5 to 8 times more computationally demanding than a robust RANS option.
So for practical engineering, you're generally forced toward RANS models, but you've already said swirling flow is notoriously difficult to model accurately with averages.
It is. So they have to pick the best RANS tool for the job. For capturing those highly turbulent, strongly swirling flows and calculating the exact size and strength of those internal recirculation zones, which are the key to stability, the Reynolds Stress Model, or RSM, is often the most accurate RANS choice.
But I'm guessing it's slow.
It's slower, yes.
Yeah.
So the RNG K-epsilon model is frequently chosen as a robust compromise. It's faster to compute and still excellent at predicting secondary components like carbon monoxide, giving the engineer a highly usable design in a reasonable time frame.
And then you have to layer the chemical reactions on top of this complex turbulence model. You aren't just modeling flow, you're modeling combustion speed.
Right, and that requires specific chemical kinetics models. Because this producer gas contains water vapor and operates at high temperatures, we have to account for reactions like the water-gas shift mechanism alongside standard oxidation.
But the real challenge is linking the chemistry to the fluid motion.
Yes.
Because in these turbulent flows, the speed of mixing dictates the speed of the reaction, not just the temperature.
Precisely. That's why we use models like the eddy dissipation concept or Magnuson's model. These models mathematically calculate how fast chemical reactions occur, not based on pure temperature, but on how rapidly the turbulent eddies, those little swirls of gas, are bringing the fuel and oxidizer together.
The complexity of the flow dictates the chemistry.
It absolutely does.
That was quite the deep dive. We started with this overwhelming environmental challenge of municipal solid waste and the need to move past uncontrolled burning and landfill danger. We then moved through the technical problem of waste to gas. How do you handle this really difficult, low-calorific fuel?
And we found that the solution is a brilliant piece of applied physics, the vortex. Organizing a powerful swirling motion provides the intense, rapid mixing needed to stabilize combustion in those low-energy fuels, and that can be reinforced by recycling waste heat.
And the practical application is transformative, integrating these vortex designs with the Stirling engine. This creates a highly efficient, durable, and ecologically safer pathway to generate energy that is just uniquely suited to handling raw, dirty producer gas without expensive pretreatment.
The whole engineering journey, from billions of tons of trash to a stable, clean energy output, is really summarized by this mastery of fluid dynamics. Vortex combustion unlocks the WTG pathway. It offers a dependable method for real resource reclamation.
So what does this all mean for you? The seemingly simple problem of instability in burning low-quality gas has pushed engineers to master the controlled power of a man-made vortex, literally harnessing localized rotational motion. Think about that. Given that fuel composition, heat content, and flow rates fluctuate wildly in almost every complex industrial process, from chemical synthesis to large-scale hydrogen production, how much more might controlling something as fundamental as the swirl influence those systems? Where efficiency relies on perfect turbulent mixing and precise heat distribution. The stability of our future energy systems might just depend on mastering the controlled chaos of the perfect spin.